Imagine for a moment the haunting parallels between two worlds separated by decades, yet bound by their obsessions of survival under duress. On one side, we had the dramatized nightmare of Squid Games, where hundreds of players, each marked with a number, are thrust into life and death contests for the promise of financial freedom. And on the other, the historical atrocities of the Holocaust, where victims stripped of their identities were tattooed with numbers that sealed their fate within the gates of hell. The comparisons deepens. In Squid Games, alliances are formed, betrayed, and shattered, as participants vie for survival. Similarly, in the Holocaust, some victims, in the unimaginable pressures of the camps, were forced into grim decisions, sometimes turning against one another to survive. And while the players in Squid Games ran desperately towards the door in the red light, green light game to escape annihilation, history tells of victims rushing towards the doors of gas chambers, clinging to a sliver of hope that beyond them lay salvation instead of death. The haunting imagery doesn't end there. The furnaces down in Squid Games where fallen players are incinerated echo the ghastly, real-world crematoria that burn day and night in the places like Auschwitz. These visual and thematic parallels are not just eerie, they are a stark reminder of how human suffering, exploitation, and desperation transcend the boundaries of fiction and reality. Now, this story delves into a survivor's harrowing journey through the Holocaust. But with this opening reflection, the parallels remind us that even fictional depictions of despair cannot fully capture the weight of such real-life horrors. As we explore this account, consider the profound cost of survival and the choices that leave scars far deeper than the numbers etched into skin or stitched onto a game uniform. To understand the horrors of the Holocaust, it's essential to grasp the chilling way numbers define existence. For the players in Squid Games, a number was signifier, a label that erased individuality and boiled each person down to a pawn in a deadly game. Similarly, in the concentration camps, tattoo numbers stripped millions of their humanity, reducing individuals to mere entries in the Nazis' cold, calculated machinery of death. Now, one such number, Auschwitz number 34207, belonged to Joe Romstein, a Polish Jew whose life was altered when his town of Radom fell under Nazi control. Before the war, Radom was a thriving industrial city with robust Jewish population, one-third of its 75,000 residents. Joe's life there was modest yet full, centered around family, work, and faith. His mother struggled to provide for her 5 children after her husband's death, instilling resilience and resourcefulness in her children. Joe's early life was marked by simplicity, barefoot games in the streets, the warmth of a close-knit Jewish community, and the predictable rhythm of daily life. But the creeping shadow of anti-Semitism began to shadow that predictability. Nazi propaganda, boycotts of Jewish businesses, and the growing hostility of once friendly neighbors painted a grim picture of what lay ahead for them. In 1942, that shadow fully enveloped Radom. German soldiers began rounding up Jewish men, women, and children, forcing them into ghettos and labor camps. Joe's family, like so many others, was divided, their fates unknown as they were swept into the Nazi machine. For Joe, this meant forced labor, endless suffering, and the imaginable reality of the Auschwitz concentration camp, where the number 34207 became his new identity. Auschwitz itself was a dystopian horror, a place of systematic dehumanization and mass murder. The infamous sign at its entrance, Arbeit macht frei, which means work sets you free. It cruelly echoed the idea of escape through effort, a dark mirror to the premise of Squid Games, where financial freedom was dangled as a reward for endurance and obedience. But in Auschwitz, there was no prize, no freedom, only the relentless grind of survival. This is where Joe's story begins. In a world where survival was no game, and the stakes were not just like life and death, but the very essence of humanity. From the streets of Radom to the gates of Auschwitz, the backdrop to Joe's journey underscores the profound cruelty that men are capable of, and the resilience required to endure it. The day Joe Rumstein was assigned the number 207, he became part of a system designed to strip him of everything: his identity, his dignity, and his will to live. Auschwitz was not just a place of death, it was a factory of annihilation, where with every process carefully calibrated to destroy both body and spirit. Yet, as Joe's story reveals, even in the darkest places, the human spirit can cling to fragments of hope and identity. Now, Joe's journey to Auschwitz began with his forcible removal from his home in Radom. The Nazi had systematically dismantled Jewish life there, herding families into ghettos, confiscating businesses, and crushing any semblance of normalcy. Joe's separation from his family came suddenly, with soldiers banging on doors before dawn, demanding men and boys come with them. Clad only in his thin pajamas and bare feet, Joe was pulled into the chaos, leaving behind the only world he had ever known. And at Auschwitz, the infamous arrival process was brutal and dehumanizing. Stripped of his clothes, hair, and belongings, Joe was shoved into lines where SS officers barked orders and conducted selections. To the left, it meant labor, and to the right, guaranteed death. Now, Joe survived the first of many selections, but the nightmare was just beginning for him. He was tattooed 34207, the ink biting into his skin as he became another cog in the Nazi killing machine. And each day at Auschwitz was a battle against the elements, the guards, and his own despair. Joe recalled the binding cold of winter, where prisoners worked from dawn to dusk with little more than rags to protect their bodies. Hunger gnawed at him constantly. The rations were meager: a piece of bread, a thin soup that barely resembled food. Prisoners often fought over scraps or resorted to stealing just to survive. The psychological toll was as devastating as physical. Joe watched as prisoners turned on each other, betraying friends and family in desperate attempts to curry favor with their captors or secure an extra crust of bread. The camaraderie of shared suffering was rare, and trust was a dangerous gamble. Joe learned quickly that in Auschwitz, survival often came at the cost of one's humanity. Yet Joe found moments of resilience. He remembered small acts of kindness that defied the horror around him. Prisoners sharing a piece of bread, a whispered prayer in the darkness, or a knowing glance that reminded him that he was not alone. Now, these fleeting moments became lifelines, helping him endure the unendurable. And as the months turned into years, Joe became an experienced prisoner, learning how to navigate the camp's deadly routines. He worked tirelessly, his hands blistered and raw from back-breaking labor. He avoided drawing attention to himself, knowing that weakness or defiance could mean a death sentence. And despite the odds, he had held on to that hope, that little hope he had that someday, somehow, he might escape this nightmare. Now, that number 34207, etched into Joe's arm, was meant to erase him completely. But for Joe, it became a testament to his endurance, a symbol of his refusal to let the Nazis strip him of his humanity. And even in the face of unspeakable cruelty, Joe found ways to fight back, not with weapons or rebellion, but with the sheer determination to survive. Joe Breinstein's survival at Auschwitz defied logic. Of the millions imprisoned there, few left the camp alive. For every decision Joe made, every action he took, there were countless variables behind his control that dictated life or death. Yet examining his story reveals threads of resilience, timing, and just sheer luck that together form his path to survival. One theory about Joe's endurance lies in his ability to adapt quickly. New arrivals at Auschwitz often froze under the crushing weight of fear, unable to grasp the camp's rules until it was just too late. Joe, however, absorbed every nuance, watching how prisoners who drew too much attention were beaten or worse, killed. He kept his head down, worked as hard as his body would allow, and avoided confrontation with any of the guards. Joe's physical health also played a significant role. At the time of his capture, he was a young, strong, and accustomed to manual labor from his work in Radom. Unlike some prisoners who arrived malnourished or ill, Joe's body had reserves to draw from, even as the camp's harsh conditions drained him daily. However, his strength was no guarantee of survival. Thousands who were equally so strong they fell victim to exhaustion, illness, or the whims of the SS Nazi guards. Locke too played an undeniable role. Joe recalled moments when he was spared from death purely by chance. And during selections, he often found himself in the line for labor rather than the gas chamber. A decision made in seconds by an officer who saw potentially utility in him. And there were times when he narrowly avoided punishment or when the camp's chaotic systems worked in his favor, guaranteeing him a rare reprieve. The social dynamics within the camp were another factor. While many prisoners turned on one another, Joe occasionally found allies who offered small acts of kindness. He shared stories of inmates who shielded him during beatings or helped them avoid assignments in the most brutal work details. These alliances, fragile as they were, offered fleeting moments of safety in a world designed to destroy trust. Perhaps the most profound element of Joe's survival was his mental resilience. Many prisoners succumbed to despair, their will to live extinguished by the relentless suffering. Joe, however, he clung to memories of his family, his life in Radom, and the faint hope that he might one day return to them. And he often repeated silent prayers, finding solace in the faith instilled in him as a child. His belief that life might hold something beyond Auschwitz gave him a reason to endure each day, no matter how bleak it was. Historians and psychologists study survival in the camps that often point to the importance of purpose. Survivors tended to have a reason to keep going, whether it was the hope of reuniting with loved ones, the desire to bear witness, or sheer stubbornness against the odds. And for Joe, it was all of these and more. He knew that surrendering to despair would mean giving the Nazis exactly what they wanted. Joe's stories also raise broader questions about survival under extreme conditions. Why did some individuals faced with the same horrors preserve while others could not? Was it a matter of personality, preparation, or something deeper? An indefinable spark that kept certain people moving forward? For Joe, survival was a combination of factors, each one as essential as the other. Ultimately, his ability to endure was not just a matter of chance or strategy, but also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Joe's survival defied the odds. Yet his story is not merely about escaping death, it is about holding on to life in the face of a system designed to completely erase it, to just get rid of him. The end of Joe Ramstein's time in Auschwitz came with the approach of the Allied forces. But liberation did not come as a triumph rescue. Instead, it unfolded in a haze of fear, confusion, and disbelief. For Joe, survival had meant clinging to a silver of hope amid unrelenting suffering. But the final days of the camp would push him to the brink. Now, it's early 1945. As the Soviet army advanced towards Auschwitz, the Nazis began evacuating the camp. Prisoners who could still walk were forced on death marches to other camps deeper within Germany. Those unable to keep up were shot or left to die in the freezing cold. Joe was among those selected for the march, his body weakened but his will to survive intact. The march was a harrowing ordeal. Prisoners trudged through snow and ice, wearing thin rags and surviving on scraps of food. Joe remembered the relentless cold biting at his skin and the sharp pangs of hunger that never subside. The guards showed no mercy at all, executing those who fell behind without hesitation. And at one point, Joe considered letting himself collapse completely. The prospect of death almost preferable to the endless torment. But something inside him refused to give in. The march eventually led to another camp where the conditions, though slightly less chaotic than Auschwitz, were no less deadly. Joe knew that survival here required the same strategies he had relied on before, blending into the background, conserving his energy, and avoiding attention from all the SS guards. Now, rumors of liberation began to filter through the camp, whispered among the prisoners like fragile sparks of hope. Then the day of liberation arrived suddenly. Joe recalled the strange silence that fell over the camp as the guards abandoned the post and fled. At first, the prisoners were too afraid to move, unsure if this was another cruel trick. Then cautiously, they emerged from their barracks. Their gaunt faces turned toward the horizon where the sound of tanks rumbled in the distance. When the Allied soldiers arrived, they found scenes of unimaginable horror. Emaciated prisoners wandered aimlessly, their bodies frail from shadows of their former selves. Piles of corpses bore silent testimony to the atrocities that had occurred. Joe, like so many others, struggled to comprehend that the nightmare was finally over. The number 34207 remained etched into his arm. It's a stark reminder to him of everything he had endured those years. Joe's liberation was not the end of his ordeal. His body was ravaged by malnutrition and disease, and his mind carried the weight of what he had seen and experienced. But as he looked around at the others who had survived, he realized that he had been granted a chance to rebuild, a chance denied to millions of others. In the days and weeks that followed, Joe began to piece together what little remained of his old life. He searched for news of his family, desperate to know if anyone had survived. Each inquiry brought more heartbreak as he learned that most of them had perished, their lives extinguished in the same cruel machinery that had almost claimed his own life. Yet, even in the face of this devastating loss, Joe resolved to honor their memory by living. The number tattooed on his arm was no longer a symbol of oppression, but a testament to his survival, a reminder that he had endured the worst humanity could inflict and emerged alive. Joe's stories reach its climax not with a dramatic escape or heroic rescue, but with the quiet resilience of a man who refused to let the horrors of Auschwitz define who he was and is. In surviving, Joe carried the weight of those who could not, ensuring that their stories and their humanity could never be forgotten. Joe's survival was both a triumph and burden. While he had escaped the horrors of Auschwitz, the memories of what he endured and the losses he suffered were inescapable. His number 34207 remained etched into his arm for his whole life, and it was a constant reminder of him that a system that had sought to erase his existence. Yet Joe's life after liberation would become a powerful testament to who he is, to the resilience of him and in the human spirit itself. Now for Joe, survival was not just about enduring physical hardships, but also about preserving a sense of humanity in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Even in Auschwitz, where survival often meant betraying one's morals or others, Joe found ways to hold on to his own identity, his faith, and his hope. These fragments of humanity became his anchor, giving him strength even when the odds seemed insufferable. Now, Joe's story is a reminder of the profound cost of hatred and the unyielding importance of remembering the past. The horrors of the Holocaust, like the number tattooed on his arm, should never fade from our collective memory. They serve as both a warning and a call to action, to resist the forces of oppression and to honor the humanity of every individual, even in the darkest of times. In the years following his liberation, Joe rebuilt his life with determination to live fully and meaningfully. He went on to find success as a renowned shoe designer, a craft he had honed even in the shadows of Auschwitz. But more importantly, Joe found love, family, and a sense of purpose, proving that even after the greatest atrocities, life can bloom again. His story does not end with the horrors of the Holocaust. It continues as a story of hope, resilience, and the enduring strength of who Joe was. But sharing his experiences, Joe ensured that the memory of Auschwitz and its victims will live on. And it's a reminder to future generations how fragile and how valuable humanity life can be. Thank you for listening to the story. I hope you enjoyed this one. I try to end this one on a good note, with Joe surviving the Holocaust and a message that hopefully hits everyone in a good place. Please subscribe, like the channel. I'll be doing back and forth of stories for paranormal, true crime, survival stories, all in between. Hopefully these are all new. Some of these haven't been told. Probably it's the internet, so a lot of these stories have been told somewhere, but I'm trying to touch on subjects that are not often heard. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, please subscribe and like the channel. Thank you.